Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for attending this mini webinar with Fullscript, Hyperbiotics, and Dr. Troup. My name's Michaela. I'm part of the marketing team here at Fullscript, and we're super excited to have Dr. Troup here with us today to educate us on optimizing the impact of probiotics and improving patient outcomes. Before we hop into the presentation, I just wanted to give a reminder that this recording and slide deck will be sent to anyone who registered, so if you have to leave early or want to watch it again, you'll have direct access from your inbox. The recording will also live on Fullscript's website at www.fullscript.com/webinars, where you can access all of our past and upcoming webinars. Throughout the webinar, if you have any questions, please add them to the question section on the GoToWebinar dashboard, and we'll get to them at the end for a Q&A period. So again, I'd like to thank Dr. Troup for being here with us today. Dr. Troup serves as a Chief Science and Education Officer for Hyperbiotics. As a leading industry expert with more than 25 years of successful category and clinical nutrition experience, Dr. Troup provides key insights on innovation, selection, and use of Hyperbiotics products, and advances educational insights to help practitioners and consumers select products to support their healthy lifestyles. And with that being said, I'm now going to pass it over to Dr. Troup to take it away, and I'll rejoin you closer to the end of the presentation for a live Q&A.
Great, thanks, Michaela. I appreciate it, and thanks everybody for joining us today. I appreciate everyone's time. I'm sorry, I had some difficulty here, Michaela. I think I fixed it now. So one of the reasons why I think digestive health and the topic of probiotics and the microbiota is so important is that fundamentally it's core to every underlying chronic health condition that we're trying to manage. A lot of that is a result of changes in nutrition habits and practices. And today we know that somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to as high as 22% of Americans have some type of digestive disorder. Up to 70% of Americans experience some digestive issue or complication, with 50% of those experiencing discomfort for 6 months or longer, or in a chronic state of discomfort or having digestive disorder. We now know that this is such a prevalent issue, and more science is becoming rapidly available over time that we're learning more and more about why is the gut so fundamentally core to being able to address these chronic health issues, and how can we do it. What is still important to do is to make sure that there's a better understanding of how do you select the right probiotic or the right probiotic strain, and how do you make sure that what you select has the best chance of having a major impact on improving the health state of the individual patient. So today, in the time that we have, I wanted to talk about a variety of topics, understanding first of all why the microbiome is so important, and that it's not just about a probiotic or even a select small number of probiotics that you take, but it's about making sure the microbiome is viable, it's diverse, and it's synergistic. And we'll talk more about these as we move through. The issue and the emerging science that's coming out is very compelling, is that what makes the microbiome so important is that it influences the metabolome of the body. And so the digestive processes that the probiotics and the microbiome influences affects the underlying systems of health influence. And if it's not set properly or balanced properly, then we know that there's going to be a progression of complications in a targeted health issue. And those health issues are broad and wide. So influencing the microbiome depends on really 4 key issues that we'll talk about during the course of this webinar. Strain selection. How sustainable or viable are they? Are there synergies with different strains and synergies with pre and postbiotics and probiotics? And what's the underlying targeted system that we now have better understandings of how the microbiome, in its ability to influence the metabolome, can be effectively delivered to the patient. And then we'll focus a little bit more on the progression of digestive functional improvement and the new concept of precision probiotic support that's more than just strain specific, but also a combination of pre and probiotics. So the gut controls a lot of things. It used to be 10, 20 years ago, even 30 years ago, that we had a limited view of probiotics, and people would select probiotics to make sure that it might have some impact on the immune system. And that makes sense because 70% of the immune system is found in the gut. But what we've now come to learn more recently in the last 5 to 10 years is that it's much more than being able to influence the immune or provide barrier protection. And it's predominantly what we're beginning to find out from scientific research is the microbiome's influence to produce intermediate metabolites that then are absorbed by the body that influence underlying systems of health. And so the metabolomic response is so important because its ability to influence this, and it's much less about only the immune system now and more about underlying metabolic support. So where did this whole concept of CFUs come from? And early on, what had happened is people realized that the viability of a probiotic is based off of its transit time and how it goes from the mouth through the large intestine. And there are different pHs along the way, so that the survivability of a specific probiotic strain could be limited. In some cases, in some strains that weren't very viable, only about 10 to 20% of the strain might still be found in the feces and presented viable. So they were losing the power of its effect. But still today, surprisingly to me, is that many brands will talk about this need of CFUs, and somehow we've gotten to the point of 60 billion CFUs or 70 billion CFUs. And that origin was based only on the viability of being able to get through the entire alimentary tract for survivability. It completely minimized or ignored the more important issue of sustainability, survivability, and impact on the metabolome, more specific targeted benefit to the immune response system, and so on. We also now know from clinical studies and some recent meta-analyses that if you go back and look at what is the minimal clinical threshold of efficacy of many probiotic strains, many of the most popular strains that are available today are actually shown to be clinically effective at 10 to the 4th and somewhere between 10 to the 4th and 10 to the 10th at the upper end. So even with smaller concentrations, it's possible to have an effective probiotic. We also now know, too, that at the same time, colonization isn't necessarily the most critical issue. So being able to look at the probiotics, are they colonized, and if they dominated the digestive tract, is less important today than understanding what the specific mechanism of action is of a specific strain and whether or not it's viable, and as a result of its viability, whether or not it might have some type of impact on the metabolome. And so these concepts are and should be shifting from getting away from the concept of get the highest count that you can into do you have the right combination that's synergistic of a pro and prebiotic, and do you know not only the strain effect, but its ability to influence the metabolome as the underlying cause to the progression of health issues. So it's not about the level of activity, rather it's about the viability of the strain and its impact in the gut environment or the impact on the microbiome. Knowing minimal clinical efficacy threshold and the impact of the strain is critical. Impact of the viability of the selected strain determines the metabolomic and functional effect and benefit, and every probiotic strain needs a symbiotic environment and activator. We often tend to dismiss or forget the importance of a probiotic left to its own devices is not going to be viable. So there's a combination that's important to always think about and to consider when providing a probiotic or recommending a probiotic to patients. And in particular, that means that there has to be some energy source for the probiotic to remain viable and to proliferate. So a healthy diet is important. A diet rich in fruits and vegetables and nuts is really important. And where possible today, we now know that probiotics can be matched with a prebiotic that has an optimal combination of a specific type of a prebiotic that enhances the viability of the probiotic. And that creates a symbiotic environment and an activator relationship. That's fundamentally the most important component in understanding the use of probiotics. It's its symbiotic potential, and as a result of the symbiotic potential, its ability to have an impact on the underlying metabolic systems. So all strains have a functional effect, but not all strains have the same functional effect. And that's really important, and that's why diversity more and more has been recognized as an important feature of what's important of the microbiome, and even when selecting probiotic strains, that it's more than just one probiotic. It really should be a combination of complementary strains that are viable. I've heard in the past, and probably we all have, that the microbiome is kind of like an orchestra. There's 40,000 plus different strains of probiotics that are available in the gut, and the key is balancing them and getting them to all play nice together in a way that dominates the bad strains, creates the balance throughout the gut. The small intestine has a different profile of strains than the large intestine, and being able to combine that balance in a way is also going to be important, while still taking advantage of very specific functional benefits. So multiple strains must be complementary to be viable. There needs to be an energy source of a prebiotic, essentially, and the right strain of the probiotic should be selected. So these are really important features, and much more important than trying to recommend a product just based off CFU activity levels. So there are 4 critical issues in selecting a probiotic that delivers a targeted benefit. First, the strain. Identify the strain, and knowing how it works and what it does and how it has an influence on changing or influencing the microbiome. The second important consideration is understanding the synergy that any particular strain or strains might have, and that's really important, and that's going to be important to maximize the metabolomic potential. And coupled with that very closely is how sustainable or viable is the strain itself. In other words, what's the preferred energy source or the prebiotic that should accompany and be available with the probiotic? So synergy and sustainability are 2 of the really key factors in understanding what type of probiotic digestive solution product might be most effective. And it's making sure that that energy source and the right strain results in the production of intermediate metabolites as it influences the digestibility and the digestion of food products and the rest of what we find in the gut and the gut milieu. And then finally, if the first 3 issues can be addressed and described, then it's important to understand the systemic impact or the clinical effect that the mix of probiotics and prebiotics might have. So these are the 4 critical issues in selecting your probiotic, and 4 of the critical issues in being able to start with the gut as core in managing any health condition that a patient may present with. So let's go on with that as background and talk about the microbiome and why the microbiome issue is really about making sure that there's viability, diversity, and synergy in the microflora and how that can come about. The functions of the gut microbiota are pretty complex, as we all can appreciate. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this discussion, it's much more today than just trying to colonize the gut or trying to influence the immune system. There are very specific metabolic functions that play an important role. Many probiotics have been shown to influence the production of vitamins from the foods that are available in the gut. They participate in amino acid biosynthesis. They change the bile acid biotransformation and also help support fermentation of non-digestible substrates. They do have protective functions, and we're all familiar with that in the immune system and the balancing of the T cells and so on. But ultimately, what I think is the most important features in considering probiotics for gut health is the metabolic functions. So what we know is that as probiotics will capture the energy they need from breaking down foodstuffs, that also results in the production of very specific metabolites or intermediate metabolites from the breakdown of these foods in such a way that those metabolites have now been linked to metabolic pathways that influence very specific health issues, whether it's cardiovascular, whether it's central nervous system function or not. It's the intermediate metabolites that are produced by the microbiome with the right combination of pro and prebiotics that is the secret to understanding these mechanisms of action. And so that's why making sure the viability and the diversity of the strains are really important. So balancing the gut is core to success and improved patient care, and being able to balance the gut with diverse strains in a way that provides great metabolic support and bioavailability is really important. It can result in a reduction of inflammatory response or status. Not only can it improve the barrier function that we've been most familiar with over the last 25 plus years in considering probiotics, but it plays an important role in the production of growth substrates for other bacteria. It balances the healthy from the not so healthy strains, and also makes sure that the predominant strains are developed in the small intestine, which are different than the predominant strains in the large intestine. And more importantly, the production of growth of these probiotics are also balanced over time with aging and the different ages and the health states of the aging process and the aging trajectories that we have. So there's a right combination of probiotic strains in combination with the right or optimal prebiotic to be used for any targeted specific condition that's the objective of being able to manage patient health and rebalancing the gut and core to a systemic approach to managing health. Let's move on to the metabolome of the microbiome and how that influences all the systems of healthcare. We hear a lot now about gut-brain axis. We hear a lot about the metabolites that may be produced in the gut, and it affects a certain system like the CNS system. But that's true for virtually every metabolic-based system and pathway, that there are key metabolites and compounds that are being produced that define the metabolome of the microbiome. And so what that really means is that we now know the specific compounds and intermediate metabolites that specifically may have an effect on the metabolism of body rate regulation, general metabolic health, cardiovascular health, cognitive outcomes, as well as the classic immune responses of immune modulation, pathogen protection, and intestinal permeability. What's new in the last 5 to 10 years is being able to understand that different strains result in the production with a selected prebiotic into very specific intermediate metabolites. And not every strain and not every combination with a prebiotic results in the same intermediate metabolite. They vary. It depends on the specific prebiotic, and it depends on the specific dietary profile that the patient is consuming. What's obviously preferred is higher in fruits and vegetables, but also within the selection of fruits and vegetables as a large class of food choices, we also know that certain fruits can be more effective in the production of intermediate metabolites when combined with the right probiotic. So we're learning much, much more about the importance of how to select products, how to make products, and how to select these products as part of the therapeutic regimen in managing your patient's health. How do we know all this? There's some great work going on right now in the world of probiotics and the microbiome, combined with both metabolomics, lipidomics, and proteomics. And it's all based off of understanding where the probiotic strains can be found on the body, in the body, and ultimately what the genetic profile is that determines how it can work and what the mechanisms of action that it may play. The Human Microbiome Project first led this from about 2005 or so, and there's more and more mounting science. And more now, there are a number of biotech companies and major academic-based research groups that are discovering more and more information in identifying the more appropriate and precise selection of probiotic strains that can have a bigger impact on the metabolomic processes of the body. As an example, this slide basically confirms that by looking at the genomic backbone of the probiotic strain, we can find out what they may be predisposed to doing best. And that's when people describe that every strain has a function, but not every function is the same by strain. So understanding, say, metabolic regulation and the genetic potential that these probiotics may have on a metabolic process or on the digestive process to result in the production of intermediate metabolites is really important. And so there's great science out there now that can be used to help facilitate the understanding and also in the selection of strains and combinations. So what I would propose and describe is that probiotics are clearly important, but how they work is really impressive and important to understand. So the probiotics make up the microbiome, but the microbiome is this really huge process, kind of like a factory that's breaking down our foods and producing intermediate metabolites that play a significant role on the metabolic processes in the body. And so balancing the gut is not only about having a diverse microflora, but it's making sure that the balance of the strains that are available are also producing an optimal amount of the more positive intermediate metabolites that can help influence any specific issue that you're trying to manage, whether it's the underlying inflammatory response or it's a specific metabolic pathway related to cardiovascular health or even some central nervous system response. So what I hope I shared with you is there's a large population that suffers from digestive disorders. We're now learning more and more that it's all related to the microflora, the microbiome's ability to influence metabolic pathways. We have a better understanding today more than ever before how that metabolic process can influence or be influenced by symbiotics. Let's talk a little bit more about some specific examples on how the microbiome can then be influenced in this way and why the 4 key selection criteria and the criteria for an effective and healthy microbiome are related to strains, sustainability, their synergies, and the system of influence. So we all know the GI tract, and we understand that the small intestine has a different profile and predominant profile of certain strains. We also understand the large gut is also having an effect and influenced by a different predominant strain size. The small intestine is the predominant site for bioavailability and nutrient absorption. And that's where these intermediate metabolites are being absorbed, and that's how they can influence a number of underlying systems and therefore have such a huge influence on health conditions. So probiotics obviously can support digestibility. They provide barrier protection and can improve absorption. They clearly support the immune system, but overall, the most important feature of probiotic and symbiotic use is that its ability to influence the metabolic system by their ability to break down foodstuffs and form and develop these intermediate metabolites. So the core system of influence and why are probiotics so important? Again, we've talked about across our integrative and functional medicine world about barrier against infection. I think that's well studied and well known. We're beginning to understand more and more the nutritional effect that probiotics can have by providing the development of certain nutrients, macro and micronutrients, and then some of the intermediates. And of course, the start of our understanding of probiotics really started with discussions and science around immune and immune modulation. The new news here, or especially over the last 5 years, is the metabolic effect that it has. And now we can explain how that happens and then what the specific intermediate metabolites that are being produced by strains and combinations with prebiotics in a symbiotic environment. Typically, we now know that different strains will have different effects. Some will provide barrier protection. Others may have immune stimulation. Some strains may release mucins that provide also a barrier protection. And others may play a role in the digestibility of foodstuffs so that they convert macro and even micronutrients into other intermediate processes. And that's the most powerful influence, and that's why now probiotics are becoming more and more recognized and accepted clinically as why they can have an influence on major health issues. Now, sustainability is still important, but it's not the most critical factor. And the reason why it becomes less important on sustainability is there are ways to make sure that the viability of the strain can be delivered at the minimal clinical efficacious threshold that's required and demonstrated by clinical studies. And so what we now are able to do is use a technology that helps coat the probiotic strain and to develop BioTract as basically a coating and a carrier of a carbohydrate carrier that keeps the probiotic viable as it moves through the stomach and then through the small intestine, and puts it in a timed release way where it needs to be to have the important metabolic effect. So again, by providing this level of protection, we now know that we can get the probiotic strain to where it needs to have its greatest effect and impact on metabolic processes. And so BioTrack is an important way that basically eliminates the need to have a discussion on CFU levels, because if you have that protectability at a minimal clinical efficacious level of activity, then it's possible then to combine the synergies and have a viable product that's based off of sound clinical science. In Hyperbiotics, we have a number of condition-specific strains that we put together, all targeted at specific consumer segments and in a full range of general health and well-being. As you can see from this side, different product solutions from left to right are consumer segment, and then moving to the right side, more specific health condition targeted in their benefit. Diversity of strains is provided by making sure that the combination of up to 15 strains with a minimum of 4 strains, which provides the most optimal combination of strains to have that influence on a metabolic process, can be possible. We also then provide a prebiotic to make sure that we selected a prebiotic that's optimized to the strains, so that not only are they sustainable, but it makes them viable and it makes them metabolically active. And so the combination of the right prebiotic with a probiotic can be considered an activator of the metabolome of the microbiome. And when that happens, then it's then possible to start looking and measuring metabolomic changes in the gut first, and even in serum samples over time. Many of these changes can be measured in a matter of hours, and more typically, the systemic influence that can be seen in metabolic processes can be measured by changes in metabolomic profiles in the serum in 3 weeks, in some cases less, and definitely in 6 to 12 weeks. So it's rapid, and significant measurements can be seen. Most importantly, that we're beginning to find out is in the selection of prebiotics, we're now realizing that whereas we may have thought that there needed to be more like dietary fiber-like prebiotics, we now know and can say that phytobiotics, if you will, or very specific combinations of specific fruits and vegetables in particular, are very important, because these fruits can be broken down and digested into active phytonutrients like flavonoids or other phenolics. And then they in turn have active metabolites that are produced. What we're beginning to find out now is that whereas we have all been familiar with phytoactive like anthocyanidins or flavonoids or phenolics, we also now know that those actives that also are readily available in the fruits themselves or vegetables, that they're not the ones that play the most active metabolic influence in the gut. It's the result of the breakdown of those metabolites because of the selective probiotic that results in the formation of other intermediate metabolites that are the real activators of metabolic processes and change. So for example, just buying blueberries to get anthocyanidins is not gonna be the most effective way to provide a benefit to the patient or to improve gut health. It's important and helpful to understand how do the anthocyanidins that are available in blueberry get paired up with the right probiotic strain and even with prebiotics in a way that enhances its bioavailability, its viability and sustainability, and more importantly, its metabolic influence. And by combining these pieces of information from the science and the clinical science that's available, now we're able to have major impact in improving the digestive health of the patients we serve. The same is true in how the microbiome and the microflora can influence the gut-brain axis. We now know, and most of this research has been led by groups in Canada and also in Ireland, where they've now demonstrated that very specific microflora in combination with prebiotic can be broken down and create compounds that can influence central nervous system activation and then affect mood states. So we know that while there's 70% of the immune system is in the gut, we should also be aware that about 15% of the afferent nervous system is in the gut and then signals activity to the brain and then throughout the HPA axis as a result as well. So the influence that the right combination of pre and probiotics can have by producing active metabolites in the gut and then specific to activation of a central nervous system and the neural network to influence central nervous system function and related issues like even mild cognitive impairment can be really important in trying to understand how to put all that together. It's important, obviously, that dietary changes also accompany the use of these products to make sure that a total health profile from a healthy diet is also supporting the target clinical objective. More research has been available just in the last 3 years or so, where we've been able to identify very specific strains are strong producers, high producers of tryptophan. And so tryptophan can be an important role in mood states, also managing and helping to address anxious responses or anxiousness. Can also influence the HPA response and help manage a cortisol response. So all of these changes are really brought about by understanding what's the right probiotic strain that could be the activator with the right combination of prebiotics or the right fruit and vegetable phytoactive compound in a way that results into the most important and influential intermediate metabolite. So by understanding all that and by putting together combinations of specific strains with the right and optimal prebiotic, if you will, you have a symbiotic, and it's that symbiotic and the metabolic processes is by and large the most important underlying influence that probiotic use and formulations like that can have on conditions like digestive discomfort, mood state changes, underlying inflammatory responses, metabolic regulation or dysregulation, even liver metabolism can be improved by the right availability of metabolic intermediates as a result of the pre-probiotic combination. Allergic conditions are being studied more and more these days, and the same metabolic insights are becoming more and more obvious. So the future of influence in addressing the underlying metabolic system is quite bright. Let's focus in the end here on effective digestive functional improvement and really precision probiotic support. And it's important to understand as you have patients that you're working with or coming to you, you will always see a wide range of patients. And I would propose that we consider patients and put them on a continuum or scale of digestive health. From the left to the right, there are those people who just want to maintain, more or less from a preventive approach, a healthy gut. They want a healthy and balanced gut. And those patients in particular should have a well-balanced, diverse set of probiotics. Again, usually 4 strains or more have been shown to be optimized in being able to balance the gut and have enough influence to maintain balanced, healthy response. But it should always contain a prebiotic. As a patient who comes to you may move to the right on the scale, they may have acute irregularity to outright dysbiosis, and then still moving further to the right, functional impairment and digestive disorders ultimately. And we know that there's a continuum of very specific nutrients and ingredients and actives that can help us manage this at any particular time. So we tried to make that easy to package for patients who just are healthy and want to maintain their health profile. And so we want to optimize the diversity of the gut, but more importantly, we want to introduce this concept of metabolic influence and metabolic balance that makes sure that whatever health issue or health system that they're concerned about beyond gut health can also be addressed. As it becomes more specific to digestive discomfort or digestive disorders, then there is a specific set of probiotic strains that we can use to have a more specific and targeted or precise effect in being able to improve the outcome and the health profile of particular patients. And so moving left to right, we know that probiotics, postbiotics, symbiotics, and precision probiotics, when put together for the right condition and the right profile of patient and issues that you're trying to manage, are now possible. And there continues to be more and more work and supporting evidence to support this approach. And so particularly when it comes to those patients who do have especially chronic digestive disorder, there are really three levels of support that we want to offer and emphasize. Level 1 support is just stabilize and balance the microflora and the microbiome. Level 2 support becomes a little bit more serious, maybe a result of acute or frequent acute bouts, and then it becomes now important to balance the metabolome and optimize the microbiome. And then for the patient in really frequent and chronic digestive disorders or other underlying systemic issues and metabolic conditions they're trying to manage, precision probiotics and really understanding the more powerful strains of probiotics in combination with symbiotic effects and very, very specific metabolic intermediates that can be produced as a result, that becomes even more important in the discussion, first on how to consider what product to use, and then secondly, in the overview and discussion in and with your patients. And it's these precision probiotic solutions that are addressing advanced conditions in digestive disorders. This chart is and can be a guide in the selection from left to right of the three stages that I just described, from the general health and wellness on the left side, which is generally a very viable, diverse set of probiotics, to condition-specific issues in the middle, to the far right, which basically help describe the solutions that can be available using a precise approach on the selection of precise probiotics and precise metabolic targets. And so this slide also was another view of walking the patients or selecting the patients in any one of these categories from top to down. General health has a set of products that have been shown to be clinically effective, and going and working our way down to a progression of more serious conditions and more challenging conditions to address, including the complex and advanced care. And the more difficult that becomes, the same four criteria that we talked about near the beginning of this discussion is really important. And so finally, in summary, some of the key points that I hope I shared with you and left you to think more about and to learn and talk about more with your colleagues and patients, that the microbiome should be considered the net combined effect of a synergistic activity in the gut. Just looking at a selection of a probiotic or a group of probiotics is not enough to maximize the effective use of probiotics. The selection should be based off a synergistic understanding of the probiotic and prebiotic, because it's that synergistic effect that would determine how diverse the microflora can be, how sustainable it can be, and how metabolically active the gut activity and their response to the microbiome can be on health conditions. Metabolic activators enhance the viability of the microflora, and that metabolic activator are really the selected strain of probiotics and the combination of the symbiotic effect. All probiotic strains require nutrient energy sources to proliferate and metabolize, and understanding that and then combining that in the selection of the right phytoactive, if you will, or even the right dietary profile will help optimize the selection of the strain with the person's individual diet. So the resulting metabolic influence can have a major impact on metabolic processes and go much beyond maybe the conventional and basic immune system understanding, or even a basic understanding of the gut-brain axis, into more of a metabolic process. So probiotics should be selected based on diversity, sustainability, metabolic and synergistic cofactors, and the resulting targeted clinical benefit can then be influenced by addressing the underlying systems that have major influences on health states. With that, let me thank you for the privilege of your time today, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much for that awesome presentation. We had a couple of questions come through and we have a few minutes left, so we'll use that time to try to get through some of those. So the first question that came through was, how does the pH of diet, drinks, and water affect the microbiome and the gut? Is it important to have an adequate supply of stomach acid? And does alkaline water interfere with a healthy microbiome?
Yeah, so definitely, the pH varies in different parts of the gut. The most acidic, obviously, is in the stomach, but as you go through, the small intestine, the large intestine, pH tends to balance itself. We know that it's important to have a healthy enzymatic process to support digestion, but that enzymatic process would just facilitate the breakdown, but not the conversion to active metabolites. Fluid hydration and a balanced diet to make sure that it's not too acidic or not too alkaline can also be important consideration in managing a patient's diet and gut response.
And then just to add on to that, what pH level is optimum for the microbiome?
It depends on the viability of specific strains. There are some strains that have viability at low pHs around 4 or 5. In general, I think most people could agree that range of anywhere from 6 to 7.5 or so is probably viable. It's difficult to be able to influence the pH unless the diet is so bad that it's easier to shift, but just by dietary changes. But that neutral range in the middle is usually for most strains the most viable.
Awesome. The next question that came in is, I've prescribed a Symbiotic to a client and soon after taking it, she developed a yeast infection. She says this is something that she rarely ever experienced. Have you heard this happening to people after taking a probiotic or a prebiotic supplement for digestion?
I'm not familiar, nor have I heard of that specific example, but given what we were talking about here in the last 40 minutes or so, I guess what seems a plausible concept is that whatever the intermediate metabolites that she was then converting may have had that kind of a response. So I think we can explain it mechanistically, but I've not specifically seen it. I would suggest that when that observation takes place, it would be worth taking a look at the specific strains and the product and see how you might optimize that or shift to different strains and symbiotics and phytoactives.
Great, thank you. Another question that came in is there a difference in which pre or probiotic you would recommend to someone that has no large intestine versus someone who has a typical intact bowel?
Yeah, the small intestine is largely proliferated by the lactobacillus. And so, and that's really the most important part of where these intermediate metabolites are being produced. So I think that if you're focused on the small intestine, you can look at genus and species as well as strains, and then look at the combination that you would have supporting evidence to know what the intermediate metabolites expected to be formed would be, and focus on that.
Great, thank you. Another question is, are there any tests to measure or evaluate the gut biome, and is there any toxicities that are associated?
Yeah, there are a large number of diagnostic companies and different tests to look at the microbiome. The one issue that I guess I would point out is that if you recommend patients being tested, having the flora tested, remember that it shouldn't just be looking at or looking for any particular probiotics strains, because again, colonization doesn't necessarily mean that you now have a healthy gut. It doesn't even mean that you have a diverse microflora. So what I think would be more helpful, although it becomes quite expensive, it may be cost prohibitive, but if you had that level of interest with your patient, it's worth looking at the microflora changes, but also start measuring some of the metabolomic compounds that could be measured, and then combine that with also some serum measurements. These are very, very sophisticated tests, and not for everyone. They're expensive, and unless you've got really a serious digestive disorder, they're probably not worth doing. I think as general guidelines of what we talked about here today, you can do that and just observe the behavior and the response of the patient, and then respond accordingly.
Great, thank you. And then we have time for one more question here. So how long would you recommend consuming a probiotic for? Is it potentially lifelong or short-term until a desired response? Do we need to keep colonizing the gut and providing it with probiotics?
Yeah, so here in line is kind of maybe a little bit of myth busting, right? Is that if you believe, and many of us kind of grew up in learning about probiotics with an understanding that colonization is key and CFU activity is the criteria. That's not necessarily the case we know today, but if that was your criteria, you'd have to keep taking a probiotic every day, because even in a matter of probably days, less than 3 days, the colonization profiles and the diversity could change. So it depends on what your criteria would be on how long you should take a probiotic. Typically, I would say for chronic issues that you're trying to manage, with the right selection of a precision biotic or combination of metabolically active combination product, you would want to see the patient take that for 12 weeks and in 3-week intervals assess and get updated with the patient. If progress is being made and improvement is seen, they could stop taking the product, frankly, at 12 weeks and then reassess again every 3 weeks. So again, it depends. For general health and wellness, every day for the rest of your life. For targeted adjunctive care and additional support, you could take those products for the more serious target issue for 12 weeks and then reassess.
Great. Well, thank you so much for answering those questions for us. We know that your time is super valuable, so we're going to wrap up this presentation. Thank you once again, Dr. Troup, for being here with us today, and we really appreciate all of the attendees for taking the time to join us today. Just one more quick reminder that you will receive a copy of this recording in your inbox along with the slide deck. And again, you can also find all of our existing webinars on fullscript.com/webinars. So thank you everyone for being here, and we look forward to seeing you next time.